I'm Dr. Nathan Goodyear, Medical Director at Brio-Medical, an alternative cancer treatment center here in the great state of Arizona. We are a holistic, natural, integrative cancer center that we strive to dive into what it means to be a doctor and a physician. The word doctor in Latin can mean teacher, and the word physician in Hebrew can mean healer. Now, to achieve that, we have to understand what it means to guide treatment through research, through statistics. Because after all, science, medicine, which is a part of science, is a blend of art and science. But science guards and drives the artful distribution of the art of medicine. So it's science and art together. But we need to make sure that the science, the research, the statistics, if you will, are properly presented and understood. There's a famous quote that's attributed to Mark Twain called, "There's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics." But that is incorrectly attributable to Mark Twain. It's best attributed to a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Disraeli. Now, Mark Twain has a quote that says, "Facts are a stubborn thing, but statistics are pliable." Now, those statistics are numbers. Pliable meaning open to misrepresentation, flexible, malleable. Most don't look at numbers and statistics as something that's flexible or malleable or open for mispresentation or misrepresentation or misinterpretation. It introduces something called bias. But when patients are encountered with this fear factor called cancer, there's no word that's more feared than that word. They often want to know, what's my number? What's my risk? What's my statistical outcome? Is it 70%? Is it 50%? Is it 90%? Reminds me of a marketing campaign that was launched probably about 10 years ago across the country in men dealing with low testosterone. Know your number. But what's the validity of that number? When you look at the research as it relates to cancer research across the world, not just in the United States, but across the world, it's governed by what are called clinical endpoints. This helps us to determine the confidence and the context of that number. What's your number? There are different types of clinical endpoints. There are what are called patient-centered clinical endpoints. There are what are called tumor-centered clinical endpoints. And there are what are called surrogate endpoints. And I'm just going to read off some of these because you may have heard of them and you may not have, but I think the context here is important. Overall survival, that's the gold standard. Disease-free survival, progression-free survival, event-free survival, decrease in tumor size, also known as optimal morphological response, decrease in recurrence, pathological partial response, complete response, time to treatment failure, time to next treatment, duration of clinical benefit, duration of response, objective response, disease control rate, and clinical control rate. These are just some of these clinical endpoints. Notice no clinical endpoint has the name cure. These numbers, the statistics, the context don't point to cure. The gold standard is overall survival. The problem with that outcome, that clinical endpoint, is it takes a long time to statistically put that together. It takes decades, years to see that overall survival. So what medicine works to do correctly is to try to limit that time and limit that financial investment, because time is investment. And so they use more often what are called these surrogate endpoints. Let me highlight two disease-centered clinical endpoints: progression-free survival and disease-free survival. These are two very common clinical endpoints used across the world to reduce that time so as to save from that overall survival time point. But that's really what we're after, right? What's my number? What's my survival? What's my overall survival? Because we can't extrapolate that to cure, but we can best say overall survival. So these two tumor-centered clinical endpoints, really interestingly enough, have no clear, universally agreed upon definition. That's right. probably two of the most used clinical endpoints across the world, nobody can come to agreement on about what it even means. And yet, they are in many ways the foundation for these numbers, these statistics. Maybe that's why Mark Twain said they're pliable. More than just their definition or lack thereof is they've not been validated. Only one of these, progression-free survival, has been validated in the use of one chemotherapy in one type of advanced cancer. That's it. So not only are they poorly validated, they're as a whole really completely invalidated as statistically reliable values or clinical endpoints. So when we look at the number, we have to understand the context of the number. We can't just say what's the number without knowing the context. We have to understand what is the context that generates that number, but also what that number points to. Because when we at Brio-Medical, me, the medical director here of an alternative cancer treatment healing center in Arizona, when we quote a number, we're specifically referencing an individual, a person, a father, a husband, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a sibling. These are lives. So what we don't want to do is misrepresent the numbers, misinterpret the numbers, or leave them open to incorrect interpretation biased by patients. Because when we mention a number, 70%, no patient, no family is going to look at that as, oh, that's my progression-free survival number. Intuitively, in human nature, that's my cure number. That's my survival number. That's my life number. So what we have to do is provide the proper context of those numbers, but provide real examples of those numbers. That's why at Brio-Medical, we provide the real examples that give the context of those numbers that are specific for that tumor type. Because without that context of the number, it's just a number. It's a number that maybe doesn't have context, that's poorly validated, incompletely validated, has no definition. Thus, that statistic, that number, could be just the propagation of lies, to promote more lies, to promote more misrepresentations and more misinterpretation and more misunderstanding about what that number really means. At its foundation, healing is about an individual. It's about a life. It's not about a number, but that number points to a life, and we need to better understand those numbers statistically so that they're not malleable, they're not open to misrepresentation, but they're truth. And that's what we do here at Brio-Medical. So here's an example, some context of how statistics are malleable or misrepresented or can be changed or altered. Let's say there was a study that was combining a new drug with an old chemotherapy and compared to just the old chemotherapy, so what would be called two arms. And let's say there was a study that found it was statistically significant, this new drug with the old chemotherapy over the old chemotherapy alone. So there's some government body that sees these results and fast tracks the approval of this medication. Gets out in the clinical market, being used across the world, across the country. But then more studies start to come out that provide more context. And then the statistical significance of that original study becomes less and less and less. Then it's discovered that there's no improvement in overall survival. So the statistical outcome, the clinical endpoint that was determined that allowed this new drug to be fast-tracked actually provided no improvement in overall survival. But it did provide an improvement in a number, in a statistic. But beyond that, no improvement in overall survival, the adverse events, the side effects, the toxicity profile was huge. So what happened? Because this is not an example, it's a real case. The government regulatory body, here the FDA, removed the drug because it originated with great fanfare, statistically, based on numbers. but it provided no clear improvement in overall survival, overall outcomes that we're after as clinicians. It provided a number, but it didn't help lives. That's the example of what statistics can do and how they can be used to lead towards something that doesn't provide improvement in lives, but provides improvement in numbers. So what we want to do is move towards those lives, move towards those numbers in the context of individual cases that are real. That's what we do with statistics, and that's how we use them to guide treatments here at Brio-Medical. Context is everything. There was a recent worldwide, I would say, marketing campaign around exciting news, no doubt, of 13 patients with pancreatic cancer that were cured, quote, by a new drug. Now, cured is a statistical clinical outcome that we'll reference and discuss here in a little bit that guides us in how we approach things at Brio-Medical. In this press release, because it actually wasn't a study, the study has not been published at the time of that press release. It was simply a marketing campaign designed to create exciting news, because it clearly was. 13 patients with pancreatic cancer that are cured, that's exciting news. But it needs to be taken in context. What is the study? What's the data? How was the study designed? How was the study powered? What were the outcomes? Did they match the study design? What were the statistical and the statistical analysis? All of that was not released. It was just simply 13 patients cured. Again, very exciting news. But the statistical context of that statement was not. More, the side effects, the adverse reports, the adverse events of that were not released as well. Not telling us what was the side effect profile, what was the quality of life measures. Because if 13 patients were cured of pancreatic cancer, again, incredibly exciting, because that is a very aggressive, progressive cancer type. But if their quality of life measures on a scale of 0 to 10 were 1 or 2 or 3 with adverse events, and they were in and out of the hospital, that really provides better context about what that life for those 13 individuals really looked like. So when you look at that number of 13, it provided no clinical context, provided no statistical context, provided no validation, provided really no reality other than a press release. But there's something for us to learn from as it relates to practice, patients, in the process of teaching and healing. So what we need to do is understand that information that was out there was wonderful. And we hear about exciting announcements like this every couple years. But then as fast as they sprout, they blow away with the wind. Because the true context of the publication of the study, the true information, the context, the statistics, the numbers, the research, the adverse events, the quality of life measures, all of these come in these clinical endpoints as the study is published, and it becomes like a seed just blown in the wind, because it provides no real statistical significance. As recently a study where a drug was fast-tracked and approved, but was eventually eliminated and removed from market because it actually provided no overall survival. So let me give you a real-life example here. Patient here right now at Brio-Medical, wonderful patient, in a clinical study at a very prestigious medical institution, because it has very advanced stage 4 cancer. The patient had 1 millimeter growth on the study. So this is a clinical study that the patient's in. The patient had 1 millimeter growth. That's small. If you're not familiar with the size there, look it up. It's quite small. 1 millimeter growth, yet the patient was removed from the clinical study. So when you look at what we're doing in science, because medicine is a science, it's also an art, but it's a science. What it's about asking questions. It's not directing questions that help a determined outcome, an answer. So in this context, what we have, what appears to be a determined answer, a determined outcome. And because a patient on a drug in a clinical study had a 1 millimeter growth, they were excluded from the development of the answer. It's more about the question than it is the answer. The question drives us to the answer. If we start with the answer and then we steer all the questions, the clinical design, the clinical outcomes, the inclusion, exclusion of individuals in that study, that makes the answer statistically null and void because it's manipulated. As Mark Twain said, facts are a stubborn thing, but statistics are pliable. What we want are facts. And this patient is a fact, a life, a mother, a wife. And 1 millimeter growth, yes, it's a small growth, but if left in the context of the study, provides a more true, I think more scientifically valid answer about what is this drug going to do. Because excluding all bad outcomes steers the bias of the outcome, the answer, to all positive. But if you've removed all the negative and all you've got the positive, is there's no reliability to it, no statistical reference to it. So if it showed 70% disease-free survival, and yet you took all the people out that had a decrease in disease survival, there's no reliability to it. Thus, there's no validity to it, and there's no number that you can trust in it, whatever that number may be, 10%, 90%. So that's the context of how real-life research can be used to create bias or maybe interpretive bias in real-life individuals. That is the power of statistics when it's in truth or when it's not in truth. Because when there's no truth, when truth is relative, you can't trust any of it. Let's talk about studies, because when we talk about research, when we talk about numbers, often what we're talking about is the conversation that a doctor or a clinical staff member will have with a patient or family. That's one area that's open to, I think, misrepresentation or misinterpretation, so bias. But that comes out of publication research. Really interesting, a statement from the editor of British Medical Journal some years ago, actually not that long ago, actually said this. In the period from 2000 to 2010, a total of 788 papers have been retracted, expunged from the public record. Approximately 3/4 of these papers had been withdrawn because of serious error, and the rest of the retractions were attributed to fraud, data fabrication, or falsification. The number of articles published between 1950 and 2004 that ought to be retracted should have been as many as 100,000 or at least 10,000. He estimated that 1.29 papers were published in peer-reviewed medical journals every minute. Every minute. There's no way doctors can read all of this. And what he said was this, and this is astounding. Only 5% of published papers reached minimum standards of scientific soundness and clinical relevance. Oh, but it's more. And in most figures, that number was under 1%. Now, what does all the context of that mean? That means there's an industry in medicine that's about publication, which is awesome. We need research, bench research. We need clinical research. We need all of it. But when the purpose becomes about the research and not about the patients, we lose the context of the research. And the relevance becomes more about the part that the research drives, which can be production and profits, and not the benefit to the patient. That is overall survival. That is the ultimate outcome, clinical endpoint we want. So here is a editor of a leading worldwide journal, British Medical Journal, telling us that the validity of this research as a whole is less than 1%. And so if you extrapolate those numbers out, you're literally, from 1950 up to even today, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of published articles that are scientifically null and void. Yet these scientific publications serve as the backbone for the conversations that doctors have with patients. The patient's looking for numbers, the doctor's presenting the numbers, yet I would propose neither really understands the context of the numbers, the validity of the numbers, or even the definition of the numbers. Because a number is just a number. It's not a life. It's not an individual. You have to bring those two together to provide proper context. Your healing journey begins today. We at Brio-Medical are about teaching. Remember, the word doctor in Latin means teacher. So we want to teach. I encourage you to go to our website at www.brio-medical.com or social media sites to find our videos, because these will be coming. The teaching, the information will be ongoing. So follow us there. Connect with our patient care coordinators through our website, the number there you can call. And you can begin your healing journey, but more so continue your healing journey and spread the word about what it means to heal in the process of cancer through the videos, the blog posts, and the information we put out there. Healing is great, but teaching people how to heal themselves is what we should really be focused on. And at Brio-Medical, we will heal and we will work to teach as well, because that's what the words physician and doctor mean.